أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا صاحبي السجن أما أحدكما فيسقي ربه خمرا وأما الآخر فيصلب فتأكل الطير من رأسه قضي الأمر الذي قضي الأمر الذي فيه تستفتيان. وقال للذي ظن أنه ناج منهما اذكرني عند ربك فأنساه الشيطان ذكر ربه فلبث في السجن بضع سنين. وقال الملك إني أرى 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات. يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون. قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. وقال الذي نجا منهما وادكر بعد أمة أنا أنبئكم بتأويله فأرسلون. يوسف أيها الصديق أفتنا في 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات لعلي أرجع إلى الناس لعلهم يعلمون. قال تزرعون 7 سنين دأبا فما حصدتم فذروه في سنبله إلا قليلا مما تأكلون. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك 7 شداد يأكلن ما قدمتم لهن إلا قليلا مما تحصنون. ثم يأتي من بعد ذلك عام فيه يغاث الناس وفيه يعصرون. وقال الملك ائتوني به فلما جاءه الرسول قال ارجع إلى ربك فاسأله ما بال النسوة اللاتي قطعن أيديهن إن ربي بكيدهن عليم. صدق الله العظيم. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another weekly Surah Halaqa, where we are discussing the Tafsir of Surah Yusuf. In last week's Halaqa, we had went over the incident where the 2 prisoners that had arrived with Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, they came to him with dreams that they had seen, and they sought the interpretation of those dreams. And Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, before addressing and giving them the interpretation of their dreams, not only did he establish his credibility by showing the miraculous nature of what he was able to foretell from the food that they would receive, the type of food, the quantity, the taste, and when it would arrive, and things like that, in order to basically solidify their faith in his knowledge, in his capability. And then Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam gave them da'wah towards Islam. He narrated to them the way of Tawheed, the way of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam and his household and the prophets that came before, and how their way is a monotheistic way. And Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam afterwards puts himself into that position and says that it is not, it is not appropriate for me as a prophet of Allah, as a person coming from this long lineage of prophets, to be able to engage in something that is detestable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, such as shirk, such as the associating of partners in worship, as was the common religion of the people. So then he makes an intellectual argument. أَأَرْبَابٌ مُتَفَرِّقُونَ خَيْرٌ أَمِ اللَّهُ الْوَاحِدُ الْقَهَّارُ. Tell me, is it better to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the Almighty, who has the power over everything, who subdues everything else? Or is it better to worship, these multiple gods and idols and false things that you yourself and your forefathers have attributed? In reality, there's no power that they hold and benefit that they can provide. So making that intellectual argument, he leaves the ball in their court on whether they would like to accept Islam or not, whether they would accept his invitation or not. And from verse number 41, we see that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam turns their attention back to the purpose that they had initially came and sought him out for. And in this ayah, we see that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam gives a very apt and accurate interpretation, where he says that أَمَّا أَحَدُكُمَا فَيَسْقِي رَبَّهُ خَمْرًا, that as for one of you, you will, that person will be in charge of giving, drink, meaning that person will be responsible for making his master, drink wine. He will basically become the cupbearer. وَأَمَّا الْآخَرُ فَيُصْلَبُ فَتَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ. And the other person, this person will be crucified. This is a person that will be killed, and the birds of prey will then eat from his head. Basically, his dead body will be laying there, and the dead flesh and the carrion will be eaten up by the birds of the prey. And that is what the meaning of this dream is that they had seen. قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ. And then he said that the matter has already been decreed regarding which you have inquired. So very quickly, in this ayah, number one, we see that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam does not specify who is the one to be killed and who is the one to be spared, right? And the reason for this is that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam had an immense amount of compassion and empathy. He did not want to disclose the identity of the person who would be tried and who would be killed, in order to avoid giving mental anguish to the person. Right? Imagine if somebody were to tell you that you're on death row and you have only days to live, and the state has decreed that you will be receiving the death penalty. Imagine the level of anxiety and stress and sadness and grief the person would be experiencing. So in order to save the person who would unfortunately have to undergo this fate, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam keeps it ambiguous. And he basically says that one of you will be saved, and you will be restored back to you will have the rank and the position to become close to the king. You will start serving the king again. As for the other person, you're going to die, right? And that's what the interpretation of the dreams that you have narrated before me, that is what the interpretations are. And he says that قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ. Ending off this verse, he says that the matter has been decreed, right? Whether you come and you want to debate with me about the interpretation, you want to ask me questions about it, you may not want to believe in it. You may think that, what is this person even talking about? How can a person deduce that one person will die from this and the other person will be freed? How can a person deduce this from the dreams that they actually saw? So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam is saying that this is not something that I'm making up from my own, but rather it is from the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to me and He has gifted to me. And through that knowledge, I'm giving you the information regarding the decree that has already been decided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is the one meaning of this. The second meaning is where if we take the opinion of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu an and other mufassirin, who actually are of the opinion that these two people that came and they narrated this dream to Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, they in reality had falsified their dreams. They hadn't seen dreams, but they decided to test Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, his integrity, his knowledge, his piety, and they came and they made up these false dreams to test Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. So when he gives this interpretation, when he says that one of you is going to die and the other one is going to be spared, they came out and they said that, oh, in reality, you're lying because we didn't actually see any dreams. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam said, قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ, whether you saw those dreams or not, the punishment that you, the fact that you lied about seeing those dreams and you wanted to test the integrity of the Prophet and you wanted to test Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the punishment that you will now have to suffer. That the fate and the decree has already been decided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something that we actually take a lesson from this, subhanAllah, that when it comes to relating dreams, especially, we need to be very, very careful about whom we go to for interpretation. Because if it is not a good and righteous person, a person who's compassionate, a person who cares, then they might end up giving some interpretation that will very negatively affect a person. And the second thing is that going to a person of knowledge, going to a person of compassion, it will always ultimately be beneficial, because then the person will be able to offer an interpretation that will, in the end, be beneficial. And even if there is bitter news to be delivered, the person will have the compassion enough to deliver it in such a way that will soften the blow. So there's some lessons that we take from this ayah and from the conduct and the response of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. Now we see in the next ayah that although he had left it ambiguous, before they departed, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam takes the person whom he knew that this person would be spared. He took him aside and he mandated to him that, you know what, when you are exonerated in front of the king, when you are spared, then I need you to do me a favor. اذكرني عند ربك, mention my case to your Lord, mention my case to your king, that there is this innocent person who is basically still rotting away in this prison. The person is completely guilt-free. The person has not done anything and has been wrongfully imprisoned. So basically, mention my case to your king. اذكرني عند ربك, I've done you a favor. Now mention my case to the king so that I may be freed from this prison. I may be freed from these horrid conditions. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that shaitan then made this person forget, right? The request of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was there, but over time, when he goes in front of the king and he is actually exonerated, he's freed, he's basically restored back to his old position. And then we know this to be the person who was the original cupbearer, the original person who used to be the royal wine server to the king. So this is the person that actually was part of the initial plot to assassinate the king, but then he backed out. And because he backed out and because he disclosed the plot to the king, as a result of this, the king, basically allows him to go free. And then he's restored back to his old position. So this person, as all of these things happen, فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ, right? Shaitan makes him forget about the request of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, and he completely forgets about everything that transpired in the prison. He is moving on with life. And as a result of him forgetting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. Yusuf alayhi salam then has to remain in the prison for a long time, for several years. So the word bid'un over here refers to a number between 3 and 9. And some scholars say that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam actually stayed in this prison for about 7 more years. 7 more long years he had to basically stay in this prison as a result of this person forgetting to mention his case. Now, out of this, subhanAllah, one of the lessons that we take away from this is that it is possible for a person, for a believer, to seek out means in their moments and in their times of difficulty. It is possible for them to, it is possible for a person to adopt what is, the means that are at their disposal. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam requesting this person to go and mention his case before the king, this is not against tawakkul. However, just because this is something that is permissible, it doesn't mean that this is the best thing for a person who is a prophet of Allah. Because the prophets of Allah, as we know, they are the special servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a different way of dealing with them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, did not want any medium between himself and Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. So as a result, some scholars, they mention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a result of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam seeking out this medium, Allah made this person forget. Right? This was another way of doing tarbiyah to Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, who was this exalted personality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically does his tarbiyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rectifies him in this way by making him stay in the prison for a longer time, because he adopted the means that was in front of him instead of solely relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, this is a very high station, and this is usually reserved for those servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that are very close in maqam and rank and station with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is not for the people who are not in that position, who are not in that rank. For the common people, using the means that are at their disposal, using what is permissible, this is actually something that is more advised. This is more advisable for them. Reason being is that if a person doesn't do that, then they'll end up suffering even more, because not only will they miss out on their chance to get reprieve, they will also end up suffering because they do not have the same type of connection and closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they will be satisfied with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they have to suffer a little bit further. So if we take a typical example of this and we relate it to our own case, our own lives, for example, if a person falls ill, a person falls sick, right? The difference between a person who is a prophet of Allah, imagine the prophet of Allah falling sick, having a fever, going through some sort of pain, and imagine a normal follower, normal ummati, a normal Muslim going through the same thing, right? Now, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ always teaches us that we should be practical and we should adopt the means that are in front of us. We should always look for the easy way, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it to us, and this is a rahmah. However, the Prophet ﷺ will not adopt the same means for himself, because his maqam and his station is very, very different. It is like, for example, a person who may be very close to the president, right? The way that the president will chastise a person that is very close to them, rather than a person who is a common person, is going to be two very different sets of dealing, right? The president, if the person close to the president does something wrong, this is actually much more of it has a much bigger impact, and it has a much bigger idea of betrayal than a normal and a common person who doesn't have that same level of connection and access doing something like this. So this is what it is, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a result of this, keeps Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam in the prison for this. But then again, obviously, a time will come that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam is now to be taken out of this prison, and again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala employs the tactics of the ghaib, right, and the unseen plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what happens, we see this in the next ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ إِنِّي أَرَى سَبْعَ بَقَرَاتٍ سِمَانٍ يَأْكُلُهُنَّ سَبْعٌ عِجَافٌ. So what happens is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a dream to this to the king, right, the Rayyan, Malik Rayyan. And this king, he sees in his dream 7 fat cows that are being eaten by 7 lean cows. And وَسَبْعَ سُنبُلَاتٍ خُضْرٍ وَأُخْرَى يَابِسَاتٍ. And he saw 7 green ears of grain or corn. Let's just say grain. And he saw that 7 other ears that were dry. So 7 fresh ones, 7 completely green fresh ones, and 7 dry ones. So upon seeing this dream, he woke up and he called all of his close ones. Ya ayyuhal mala'u aftuni fi ru'yaya in kuntum lirru'ya ta'burun. So all of the soothsayers that were there in his kingdom, the people that used to interpret dreams, all of these people were brought into the palace. And the king narrates his dream to them, that this is what I've seen. I've seen 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 lean cows, and 7 fresh ears of grain, and 7 dry ears of grain. Give me the interpretation of my dream, if you are truly able and capable. So subhanallah, we see that none of them actually had the skill to interpret the dream of the king. So instead of being able to give a proper interpretation, what they did was they said adghathu ahlam, that they said that this is nothing but a mixture of false dreams. The word adghath comes from the word dighthun, which refers to basically the chaff or the husks that have been separated from the corn, from the grain itself. So it's like a pile of chaff, or a pile of a mixture of wasteful things. So the idea is that this dream that you have seen, this is a mixture of muddled thoughts and things that are not clear, and things that are completely out of the way, they're backwards. We're not understanding what is going on in this dream. This dream really doesn't it doesn't make sense. We're not able to do this. So right, that is the answer that they give, that we're not able to translate this confusing of a dream. And they're basically, in order not to disgrace their own selves, they tell the king that don't make a big deal out of this dream. This dream means nothing. But in the meantime, we see in the next ayah that the person whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had caused him to be exonerated, and he received the knowledge of that from Yusuf alayhi salam in the prison, the royal cupbearer, he was standing in the vicinity, and he overheard the conversations of the dream interpreters and the king, and he came forward. He comes forward and he says, and as soon as he heard about the king asking for an interpretation of a dream that he had seen, finally it clicked with him, and he remembered the case of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. That Yusuf alayhi salam was a person who was so well respected in the prison. He was such a spiritually respected person, and he was so knowledgeable and caring, and he's the one that gave me this interpretation that would foretell of my being exonerated by the king. So he remembers Yusuf alayhi salam, and then he comes to the king and he says, "Ana unabbi'ukum bi ta'wilihi fa'arsilun." So he says that I have the interpretation that you're seeking, and then he proceeds to basically narrate the spiritual maqam of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, and to say how pious of a person he is, how knowledgeable he is, and what a beautiful and wonderful person he is. And then what he does is that he requests permission from the king, that please send me to the prison, let me go and visit Yusuf, let me ask him for the interpretation, and then I'll bring that knowledge back to you. So the Quran doesn't go into the details of all of that. The Quran simply mentions one word by saying فَأَرْسِلُونَ, that send me to Yusuf. فَأَرْسِلُونِي, send me forth to Yusuf alayhi salam. So he basically requests permission, and then he goes to the prison, and his arrival at the prison and the way that he first sees Yusuf alayhi salam, none of that is mentioned by the Quran, because this is already understood by conjecture, that it can easily be understood that this is what had transpired. So the Quran doesn't mention those details because those are not relevant. And then in the next ayah, we see that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, when he approaches him, right, the way that he addresses him is he addresses him by saying, Ayyuha Siddiq, O man of truth, meaning that, you are a truthful person, you are a person worthy of praise, and you are a person who is upright, establishing his position and his station, in the eyes of the people, that you are a person who is a trustworthy person. Aftina fi sab'i baqaratin, give us the interpretation regarding the 7 fat cows which are eaten by the 7 lean cows, right? And the 7 ears of corn, or the 7 ears of grain that were basically fresh and green and lush, and وَأُخْرَ يَابِسَاتٍ, and the others that were dry, the 7 ears of dry grain. لَعَلِّي أَرْجِعُ إِلَى النَّاسِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ, so that I can return back to the people, so that they may know. They may know with regards to what? Not only should they know regarding the interpretation of this dream, but they may also know about your excellence, about your knowledge, about your virtue. So as a result of that, you may be freed from this prison. So we see that this person, subhanAllah, is approaching Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam after such a long time. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam had to suffer in prison because this person forgot the one request that he had made. It is actually related in a hadith that is recorded in Bukhari and Tirmidhi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself said, regarding the excellence and the patience and the virtue and the high moral station of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, that look at the patience that he had, and the high character that he had, that he didn't say to him that, what's wrong with you, right? You're coming to me after such a long time, I've had to suffer in this prison for so many years. You completely forgot about me, and the only time that you remembered me was when you needed something from me. Yusuf alayhi salam did not respond in that way, but rather he went out of his way. Not only does he give the interpretation as we see in the next verse, but he also offers advice on what to do with the interpretation, how to go about it in such a way that will prove beneficial, not only for the king, not only for the kingdom, but also for the people at large, the people of Egypt. So this is the high fortitude and the character of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, in the next ayah, he says, قَالَ تَزْرَعُونَ سَبْعَ سِنِينَ دَأَبًا, that you will plant for 7 years consecutively, meaning that the crops that you plant for 7 years, those crops will yield the normal amount of grain, and the results that will come about is that it will be 7 plentiful years, meaning that every year for 7 years you're going to have plenty of growth, you're going to have a lot of crops, there will be enough food, there will be a lot of abundance. So what you should do is, don't waste everything, don't eat up and don't consume everything, but rather فَمَا حَصَدْتُمْ فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنْبُلِهِ, that whatever you harvest, you should leave it in its spikes, leave it inside of the ears, don't expose it, don't take it apart, and don't crush it into grain, and because if you do that, what will happen is that the grain itself will decay, right? It won't last, you will not be able to store it. فَمَا حَصَدْتُمْ فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنْبُلِهِ, that whatever you harvest, the majority of that portion should be something that is stored, and you can eat a small portion from that. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تَأْكُلُونَ, little bit can be used, can be consumed, but the majority portion of it should be stored. Why? because Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam knew from the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to him that the indication of this dream was that there would be 7 years of rain that would follow. 7 consecutive years, there would be rains that would come down, there would be plentiful crops. But then after those 7 years, there would be ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ سَبْعٌ شِدَادٌ. So there would be 7 years of drought that would follow, right? 7 years where it would not rain, and the people would not have crops, and they would not have food to eat, and the animals would suffer, and the people would suffer. So he knew what was coming, what was about to befall the people of Egypt, the people of that area. So he basically gave them advice that during the 7 years where you have plentiful grains, you have foods, make sure you store for that time of drought. So he says, ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ سَبْعٌ شِدَادٌ يَأْكُلْنَ مَا قَدَّمْتُمْ لَهُنَّ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِمَّا تُحْسِنُونَ. After the 7 years of plenty of rains, of plentifulness, there will come 7 difficult years. And during these years, there will be droughts, there will be no rains, and whatever was stored during the 7 previous years, it will end up being consumed by the people. It will consume whatever you had set aside, in your grain stores, except for a little except for a little from which you will store, meaning that only a little bit will be left behind. And this is important because this amount would be necessary for the reharvesting that would come after that. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, from this dream, drew the interpretation that there would be 7 years of plentifulness, 7 years of rain, followed by 7 years of drought. And then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him the knowledge that after those 7 years of drought, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would then send down the rain again on the 8th year, and they would need the seeds from the crops in order to replant into the ground from which the crops would grow. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam gave them very, very good advice on how to address this impending doom and disaster that was in their future. And then he said, ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ عَامٌ فِيهِ يُغَاثُ النَّاسُ وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ. So after those 7 years of drought, then there will come a year in which the people will be given rain. Meaning this is the 8th year, 7 years of drought, and now the 8th year in which it will rain, and in which there will be so much of plenty, so much of bounty and blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the orchards and the trees and the crops will be filled, and there will be so much of abundance that the people will press olives and grapes, and they will basically drink from those juices, and they'll be able to benefit from the fruits that are coming out of that. So this is the wonderful and amazing interpretation that was given by Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, and we see this. And not only did he not make a condition for the person who was asking him that before I give you this interpretation, I want you to make sure that you take me out of this prison. He could have demanded that, but Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam didn't do that. Rather, he went out of his way to give interpretation and to give advice on top of that. And this is what we see ends up working in his favor, and the king is supremely impressed by the knowledge that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam had to offer. And that is why in the next ayah we see that the king summons him, right? The king wants him brought forth, and that is why we see that he says مَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ ائْتُونِي بِهِ, that the king said, bring him to me, right? Bring this Yusuf, bring this Jewish person that is there in the prison, that was able to give me such incredible insight and such incredible advice. Bring him to me so that I can review his case and I can exonerate him. But look at the high moral character of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, that فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ الرَّسُولُ قَالَ ارْجِعْ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَاسْأَلْهُ مَا بَالُ النِّسْوَةِ اللَّاتِي قَطَّعْنَ أَيْدِيَهُنَّ. That when the messenger from the king came and he said that the king is summoning you, the king is about to review your case and you may be exonerated, Yusuf alayhi salam didn't immediately just leave the jail. He didn't just walk up out of the prison and just follow the messenger. No, he wanted first and foremost to find out that the case regarding which he had been thrown into prison for, did the people still blame him for that? Was there any sort of doubt regarding him concerning that case? So he said that go back to your Lord, go back to the king, and ask him regarding the case of the women who cut their hands. ما بال النسوة اللاتي قطعن أيديهن. What is their condition? Ask the king to review this weird incident that happened where these women had cut their hands. Ask the king to find out the reality of what their situation was. And Inna Rabbi bikaydihinna alim, indeed my Lord is knowing of their plan, that they try to beguile me and they try to plan and plot against me, and my Lord knows very well what they try to do. So ask the king to first inquire about that, because I'm not moving from my place until my innocence is declared. So again, this is the very high station and maqam of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam as a prophet of Allah, that he wanted his honor to be restored. He wanted his virtue and his innocence to be declared before he would seek any sort of favor. And subhanallah, this is an amazing quality to admire in Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. But again, in the hadith that is recorded by Bukhari and Tirmidhi, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself said that, had I been in the place of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, I would have taken the opportunity. I would have walked out of that prison. I would have gone to the king. I wouldn't have refused not to leave the prison. And the reason ulama and scholars say is that in the case of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, the reason why he was able to do this is he was a prophet of Allah. He had that close connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And due to that connection, he had the knowledge that by him placing this condition, it would not work against his favor, right? The king wouldn't say that, hey, look at this person, I'm calling him to exonerate him and he's placing conditions. He wants me to do other things before he even comes out. What's wrong with this person, right? So Yusuf alayhi salam knew that this is something that would not work. The temperament of the king would not change. It would actually, the whole thing would go, in his favor. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, by him mentioning that I would have, placed a condition before interpreting the dream, I would have walked out of the prison as soon as the messenger came. This is actually a pragmatic solution that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is giving for the ummah at large. Because subhanallah, think about it. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was very, very pragmatic. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a mercy for mankind, rahmatul lil alameen. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam always thought of it from a point of compassion, from a point of ease, from a point of goodness for the people, right? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would always look towards those things that would make things easy for the people and not difficult for him. And we know this from the ahadith wherein he says, Bashiru wa la tunaffiru, that give glad tidings and don't just turn people away. Don't just curse them, right? Give them glad tidings. Don't always just shout at people. Don't always be rough and tough with people, but rather be encouraging, be motivating. Yassiru wa la tu'assiru, make it easy for the people. Don't make it difficult. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying that had I been in the place of Yusuf alayhi salam, I would have taken it. This is something that is actually not against the maqam and the station of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because we know that the Prophet of Allah is Sayyidul Anbiya. He is the leader of the prophets. So how is it that a prophet who is lesser in comparison, obviously, to Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how is it possible that he has such qualities that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself is saying that he would not have been able to have or exercise those level of qualities? So again, this is what the answer is, that from a point of pragmatism, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying this because the nature of kings, the nature of leaders is not the same as it was in the past, right? With the times changing, with the different scenarios and situations, maybe if somebody who was a common person, if they were being called in, to give witness, if they were being called for their case to be reviewed, and they placed such a condition, maybe the whole case would turn against them, and then they would have to suffer, right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is pointing to the easy way out that is there in front of a person, that if a person should find those means, then they should take them, right? They should take them and consider them to be a rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not bring hardship upon a person unless they're able to bear it, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not make a person responsible for something that is above and beyond their capacity, right? So maybe this was in the capacity of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, that he was able to stay in prison even longer. Even though he had suffered, it was in his capacity of patience to be able to bear this. But it may not be in the capacity of a normal person who does not have the same maqam and same position and ranking as Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq and the ability that we're able to benefit from whatever we have covered today. We're able to exercise patience. We're able to draw from the beautiful lessons, an example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all of the Anbiya, and particularly Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. And subhanallah, these are some of the great anecdotes and stories regarding them, and these are notes of inspiration. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to follow in their footsteps in the best way possible. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. جزاكم الله خيرا. Inshallah, next week's halaqa we will cover what happens in the exoneration of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, how it is actually displayed, how the beguilement and the planning that was the plotting that was made against Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, how that is exposed, and Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam is declared innocent. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq and the ability. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.